The event was intended to be a standard official banquet, refined, practiced, and regulated, yet in one solitary, stunning instant, the crown's whole hierarchy fractured apart. Observers claimed the atmosphere shattered as Princess Anne moved ahead, her tone steady and eyes resolute, barring Queen Camilla from accessing the corridor. And as the strain escalated akin to a tempest, the gathering unexpectedly and rebelliously applauded for another figure, Queen Catherine. The events that transpired subsequently altered regal allegiances permanently. Prior to delving further into the true significance for the dynasty, ensure you follow so you escape missing any news. The evening commenced with the sort of stiff sophistication anticipated from a national occasion, intended not merely to awe international officials, but to bolster the crown's reputation as immovable. Each entrance was choreographed, every signal meaningful, and every second intended to convince the globe that the imperial engine still operated with exactitude. Yet underneath the gleaming exterior, matters were evolving. Counselors murmured within hallways that the friction betwixt Princess Anne and Queen Camilla had been accumulating for weeks, becoming more acute whenever they intersected during closed sessions. The sort of strain the estate typically concealed profoundly was presently ascending to the top, uncontainable, and disregarding it was futile. Catherine's re-emergence had merely heightened the stress. Her restoration to the public eye bore a power the establishment had silently undervalued. She did not march in claiming notice, she merely appeared, and the mood surrounding her metamorphosed. Her attendance disturbed those who had become used to occupying the emptiness she vacated. Even the international visitors felt it, remarking on how easily the vitality near her altered. For some, it was motivating, while for others, specifically those allied with Camilla, it served as an alert that the dynasty's equilibrium was tipping once more. And whilst the populace witnessed only grins, lens flashes, and ritualistic elegance, inside the residence walls, murmurs had started circulating regarding a more profound struggle. Senior aristocrats were rumored to be silently positioning themselves, expecting a phase of volatility. Some theorized that a succession emergency, long discarded as gossip, might no longer be inconceivable. The veteran guards sensed their dominion waning, whilst the junior generation felt their occasion ascending, and weaving through it all was the query nobody dared utter aloud: who would genuinely command fidelity when the throne's burden shifted again? The import of that night was not merely ritualistic. Public showings had forever possessed significance for the sovereign, but this feast bore a distinct intensity. Every motion, every signal, was examined by dignitaries from around the globe, and any indication of disharmony risked revealing frailties the court had spent decades hiding. The atmosphere grew denser as the night advanced, expectation straining like a cord before it breaks. Staff sensed it, mentors felt it, and even the invitees perceived a tempest gathering behind the cultured choreography. And in that mounting compression, a single definitive deed was sufficient to alter everything. Moments prior to the major entry, the vibe around Anne changed. She had observed mutely, hearkened quietly, and persisted patiently, but something within her solidified. Then, as if she had arrived at the juncture where passivity felt more perilous than rebellion, she marched forward with a determination that would soon resonate throughout the entire monarchy, disrupting the fragile parade and sparking a chain reaction nobody was ready for. But to comprehend why Princess Anne executed a maneuver so audacious it shocked even the household staff,
We must track the fissures that had been expanding through the lineage long before the portals ever swung wide.
People witnessed the instant she moved ahead, yet they never knew the anguish that guided her there. Princess Anne had been harboring grievances, mysteries, and alerts nobody wished to hear. Night after night, she observed choices being reached without the honor she believed the sovereign required, and as Camilla's sway expanded without restraint, Anne arrived at a private verdict. If she did not interfere shortly, the establishment she devoted her existence to would be forfeited. For Anne, the dispute had not burst forth abruptly. It had been bubbling in the silent nooks of the residence, where obligation often crashed with aspiration. She had spent decades protecting the dynasty's standing, surviving emergency after emergency, led by an unshakable faith in duty. But with every passing week, she felt the burden slide toward a concept of governance she did not identify, a version molded not by service but by tactics. It ate at her, generating a quiet war between her impulse to maintain cohesion and her increasing dread that stillness now signified complicity. She had always refrained for the benefit of the clan, but recently the price of discipline had started to feel intolerable. Her panic sharpened each time she viewed Camilla amassing clout in manners that circumvented custom. Subtle alterations in etiquette, hushed gatherings with newly emboldened guides, plans declared without conference. Anne spotted each one. The court believed Camilla's actions were benign tweaks, but Anne sensed something far more profound. These transitions were not merely upgrades, they were computed strides intended to fasten Camilla's grip on ritualistic power. What worried Anne most was how seamlessly these adjustments went undisputed, as if everyone near her had either grown lazy or fearful to query them. So Anne faced the solitary individual who ought to have hearkened, Charles. Behind fastened entries, she presented her worries, speaking with a blend of immediacy and fidelity. She cautioned him that permitting unbridled influence to leak into the crown would ultimately shatter it from the interior. But Charles, drained and swamped by ceaseless inspection, brushed her away with a hushed beg for tolerance. He believed harmony would triumph if everyone merely collaborated. Anne departed those dialogues with an expanding terror that her sibling no longer sensed the peril she did, that his wish to avoid strife was blinding him to the results of passivity. Yet, even with her years of background, Anne found herself increasingly eclipsed by political pacts coalescing around Camilla. Allies who once sought Anne's advice now drifted toward the might they believed Camilla could provide. Their changing allegiances did not merely annoy her, they made her feel as if she was sliding out of the very foundation she helped keep united. That feeling of helplessness sliced deeper than any public critique ever had, because, for the premier time, Anne felt the ground drifting beyond her grasp. Then arrived the instant that solidified her will. Anne received a paper, circulated quietly, read only by a chosen few, outlining suggested ceremonial tweaks for impending state occasions. One sentence stood out like a knife, a command placing Camilla at the vanguard of several major processes usually kept for figures of superior rank. It was more than a violation of etiquette, it was a proclamation of purpose. In that second, Anne realized this was not a mishap or an overreach. It was a schematic for reorganizing the dynasty's pecking order, one that threatened to eliminate the tenets she had upheld her whole existence. She sat with the fire longer than she typically permitted sentiment to dictate, and somewhere in that quietude she swore an oath. If nobody else would shield the establishment from being remodeled for personal supremacy, she would. She would not permit fidelity to become an arm utilized against the throne's honor. She would not stay inert whilst the monarchy was piloted into a shape she knew it was never intended to be. And with that pledge came the lucidity that her function was no longer to bolster from the margins. It was to intervene publicly if needed, regardless of the price. And as Anne's resolve toughened, another power was ascending quietly, one Camilla never foresaw.
She did not require grand arrivals or practiced orations. Her existence alone energized people. The throng surged, the mood changed, and Camilla immediately felt the menace, because Catherine was not merely returning, she was recovering the devotion that had been sliding away from the crown for months. Catherine's restoration was not rash or shallow. It arrived after long evenings of contemplation, days spent reconstructing her vigor, and a hushed realization that the dynasty was commencing a perilous chapter. She comprehended that stepping back into her tasks meant stepping into a tempest, yet she also knew that her non-appearance had generated a chasm, one that had permitted ambition to expand uncontrolled. So she readied in silence, arranging her notions, examining her feelings, and reminding herself why her function mattered. There was nothing alluring regarding the procedure, just intentional purpose, grounded bravery, and a resolve to bear the duties she once carried so effortlessly. What pressed heavily on her shoulders, however, was not merely the strain of reverting to regal life. It was the emotional sediment of knowing that the globe had viewed her battle, vanish, and reappear. She bore the knowledge that people had hypothesized endlessly regarding her health, her wedlock, her station. She felt the bite of being discussed rather than addressed. Yet, when she stepped out again, she did so with a quiet fortitude that hailed not from rejection of those doubts, but from ascending above them. This emotional profoundness gave her attendants a raw genuineness that vibrated with the populace in a manner no court schemer could fabricate. Even palace aides, who prided themselves on gauging the public heartbeat before anyone else, noted the distinction instantly. When Catherine showed up, the tone surrounding the crown lifted. Individuals leaned in, they grinned more, they reached out with a fondness that felt nearly rebellious in the face of the scandals swirling inside the estate. Councillors whispered that Catherine had recovered something beyond fame. She had recovered a sense of bond that ran deeper than etiquette. It unsettled those who leaned on rank rather than soul to secure their sway. The divergence became sharper with every passing day. Camilla wielded power through structure, pacts, and station. Catherine, conversely, held sway through faith, compassion, and the easy capacity to command fidelity without claiming it. Where Camilla projected command, Catherine radiated reality. Where Camilla shoved for acknowledgement, Catherine received it organically, without exertion or aim. It became impossible not to view the split, and the residents felt it with every appointment, every banner, every murmur that spread past its barriers. Tales began circulating that visiting officials were specifically asking for Catherine's presence at forthcoming events. Though politely phrased, these appeals bore a nuanced message. She was the regal figure they linked with honor, steadiness, and optimism. For Camilla, already grappling with Anne's increasing opposition, this evolution felt like another strike to an already brittle sense of command. Catherine had not returned to vie with her, but the result was identical. Her existence eclipsed Camilla's in ways that could no longer be disregarded as chance. And so, as the state banquet neared, the compression on Camilla grew. She sensed that the occasion would become a symbolic combat zone,
a platform where public view could tip decisively in one direction.
Catherine's return had already reignited the populace's esteem. If she stole even a shard of the limelight during such a high-visibility evening, it could signal a pivot point that Camilla could not undo. That knowledge tightened around her like a clamp, fueling her necessity to claim supremacy in manners that were increasingly lucid to those watching intently. But Catherine's restoration was not just motivating. It set the scene for a conflict Camilla could no longer overlook. Camilla sensed Catherine's refreshed sway like a chill breeze under a shut portal, subtle initially, then impossible to disregard. Resolved not to be outshone, she devised a scheme to rule the state dinner, one that would situate her unmistakably at the hub of regal power. But what she did not know was that every stride she took was being closely observed by someone who was not frightened to reveal the truth. In the days prior to the affair, Camilla convened privately with her most faithful guides, barring voices she deemed useless or tentative. These assemblies were not informal mapping sessions. They were tactical councils engineered to ensure her supremacy. She maintained that the state banquet required a solid grip, that custom must be deciphered with modern adaptability, and that the crown's reputation relied on robust governance. But beneath her poised pitch, the immediacy was undeniable. Catherine's return had shaken her, reminding her how rapidly public warmth could slide. Camilla dreaded losing pertinence, and she was intent to make the feast her podium, regardless of the subtle violations of heritage that aspiration required. To solidify her sway, Camilla pored over the sitting charts with the focus of someone drafting a war zone. Every location bore significance. Every coupling conveyed rank. She pushed to situate herself in a manner that would compel guests and lenses to recognize her command. She insisted on changes in the sequence of parade, subtly redrafting ceremonial standards to guarantee she appeared front and central. These were not slight tweaks. They were intentional endeavors to modify the visual dialect of the crown. Even veteran estate aides felt queasy, realizing that Camilla was not merely partaking in the affair. She was utilizing it to mold the tale of might. Her resolve solidified into a singular aim. She would lead upon arrival. No oscillation. No split spotlight. She believed that showing up first, commanding the entry, would reinforce her spot as the dynasty's pivotal figure. For Camilla, this was not conceit, it was survival. She had battled too long and withstood too much inspection to permit herself to be eclipsed again, especially not by Catherine, whose easy pull threatened to undo Camilla's computed ascent. In Camilla's mind, the state dinner was the flawless chance to reassert command before public feeling swung further. But whilst Camilla conducted her climb, strains seeped through the estate like a sluggish tempest. Staff noted the changes in directive, the snipped tones, the fractured allegiances. Some aides, long faithful to Catherine, paused to obey Camilla's abrupt orders. Others aligned themselves with Camilla, sensing a chance to ascend the internal trellis. The air grew charged with silent competitions and unvoiced terrors. Those trapped in the midst whispered about sects forming,
unsure which flank would triumph once the dinner occurred. It became lucid that the impending occasion was not just diplomatic, it was political, even within the clan itself. Charles, already swamped by his own duties, tried frantically to sustain peace. He implored for unity, begged for tolerance, and attempted to cushion Camilla's harsher verdicts. But his endeavors were muffled by his hesitation to defy her squarely. Charles had always favored accord over clash, and this soft method left room for dispute to deepen. Whilst he hoped the feast would emblemize stableness, his inability to claim firm command created a setting where rival visions of monarchy could blossom unchecked. Amid this ascending strain, another power amassed quietly in the shade, one Camilla undervalued deeply. Anne, fueled by her sense of task and the vow she had made to herself, watched Camilla's tactics with increasing worry.
She viewed the symbolic overstep, the neglect for heritage, the desperation masked as governance, and whilst others murmured and paused, Anne began to concrete her own scheme. She did not elevate her voice, did not solicit pacts, did not engage in the same political drama. She merely prepared herself to act, knowing that someone had to shield the crown from losing its honor in the chase for personal supremacy. And as the gleaming vehicles rolled into the palace yard that night, Camilla was oblivious her plot was about to crash head-on with Anne's determination. Witnesses stated the instant felt surreal, like time lagged. Camilla stepped toward the entry, ready to take her spot at the forefront of the parade. But then a shape moved with quiet exactitude, blocking the route. Princess Anne, arms steady, stance unyielding, voice hushed yet distinct. Gasps rippled through the corridor. Nobody had ever viewed a regal showdown so open or so intentional. The instant Anne moved ahead, the energy inside the gateway shifted sharply, as if the chamber itself recoiled from the impact of two forces that had been quietly accumulating for months. Camilla froze mid-step, bewilderment flickering across her visage before shock took over. She was not used to being dared so publicly, least of all by Anne, who had always carried herself with calculated discipline. But Anne's motion held no wavering, no trace of second thoughts, only the quiet command of someone who had finally reached her bound. The staff nearest the portals instinctively moved back, unsure whether they were viewing a mishap or an intentional fracturing of file. And then, with devastating lucidity, they realized it was the latter. Guests who had arrived early caught snippets of the moment, their whispers traveling like embers through arid grass. A foreign envoy whispered to his deputy, unsure whether to interfere or remain mute. A senior estate official tried to disguise his panic, but failed badly. Even veteran attendants, trained to sustain poise under intense pressure, showed flashes of doubt. Anne's posture was controlled, but the message beneath it was unmistakable. This was not a confusion. This was a stand. The jolt that gripped the room was not just about etiquette being interrupted. It was the realization that long-suppressed regal strains had finally burst into plain sight. Camilla's disbelief hardened rapidly into simmering rage. Her cheeks reddened, her breath tightened, and her gaze locked onto Anne with a blend of wrath and injured vanity.
This was meant to be her occasion, her opportunity to concrete authority, reclaim visibility, and hush the whispers threatening her sway. Instead, she was being halted like a junior member who had forgotten her station. Her voice, usually assured and calculated, faltered when she attempted to reply. She managed only a tense query muttered under her breath, but Anne's look remained serene, almost resolute. Camilla could feel the mortification tightening around her like a cord, each second fueling her frustration. Then arrived the silence, heavy, charged, perilous. A silence so dense it felt like pressure against the skin. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody dared to disrupt. The air was so thick with expectation that even the sentries at the door seemed unsure whether to respire.
People sensed that this was not a quarrel about positioning or timing. It was a deeper collision born from months of disregarded alerts and private resentments. And in that quietude, the pecking order of the room began to reconfigure itself. Anne was not merely stalling the parade, she was challenging the very tale Camilla had been building. Anne's words, when they finally arrived, were hushed but destructive. She did not raise her tone, she did not slur, she simply reminded Camilla with pointed calm of the etiquette she had attempted to rewrite. It was not a scolding, it was a rectification delivered by someone who had watched tradition being warped for personal profit and refused to let it happen on a night that symbolized the crown's unity. Her pitch left no space for argument. Camilla's sway might have grown behind shut doors, but here in the open, Anne wielded a different kind of might, one grounded in history, service, and ethical command. The showdown instantly shifted the emotional equilibrium in the chamber. Where moments earlier Camilla had expected to lead, now the focus had shifted entirely to Anne, whose quiet rebellion commanded more notice than any grand motion ever could. Staff who had aligned themselves with Camilla exchanged nervous looks. Those loyal to Catherine watched with newfound assurance. Even observers who understood nothing about royal politics felt instinctively that something monumental had just occurred. It was not merely a disturbance, it was a correction of path, a warning and a declaration folded into one. And standing there, trapped between humiliation and fury, Camilla sensed a truth she had long dreaded. Her grip on authority was not as secure as she had believed. But the moment that truly sealed this clash was not Anne's interference, it was the reaction that erupted behind them. As Anne and Camilla stared each other down, a sudden surge of noise cut through the strain. Cheers, loud roars, unmistakably directed at one person. Queen Catherine was stepping out of her vehicle, and the throng erupted in backing. In that instant, the hierarchy shifted. Camilla felt it, Anne saw it, and Catherine, though composed, understood that this moment carried results nobody could foresee. The roar from outside was not just spirited, it was overwhelming, a swell of emotion that seemed to break through the residence walls themselves. The crowd did not cheer out of courtesy or debt. They cheered because Catherine symbolized something they had been starving for: dignity, hope, and steady governance. Their reaction carried a genuineness that echoed through every corridor.
signaling that public fidelity, the monarchy's most precious currency, was aligning itself decisively with her. It was an unmistakable reminder that sway is not granted by label alone, but by faith, pity, and the quiet vigor people feel drawn to. For Camilla, the applause felt like a blow. Her confrontation with Anne had already rattled her assurance, but this was distinct. The cheers reminded her of a truth she had tried to ignore. Catherine did not fight for notice, yet she received it effortlessly. The adoration pouring in from outside made Camilla's anger sharpen into something far more perilous, a fear that she was losing control not just of the evening, but of the broader tale surrounding the crown. The louder the crowd grew, the more she felt her grip slipping. Her frustration deepened, not because Catherine sought to challenge her, but because Catherine did not need to. That imbalance stung more than any public slight. Anne, on the other hand, felt a quiet surge of comfort. She had taken a risk by confronting Camilla so publicly, knowing it could either restore order or ignite deeper strife. But the crowd's reaction confirmed what her instincts had been screaming for weeks. Catherine was the figure the public trusted. Catherine was the stabilizing force the dynasty needed. The cheers did not simply embolden Anne. They validated her decision to step in when nobody else dared. They also solidified her resolve, reminding her that she was not fighting alone. She was not acting out of personal resentment, but out of loyalty to a crown she believed was in danger of falling into the wrong hands.
Diplomats waiting near the entry exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the significance of what they were viewing. They had seen dynasties falter in other nations when public faith eroded, and here, in real time, they saw that faith being redirected. Their whispers carried a mixture of inquisitiveness and worry. They understood that symbolic moments like this, amplified by global media, could accelerate internal fractures and reshape alliances. The shift in energy was not merely emotional, it was political, and everyone with diplomatic experience felt the tremor. Meanwhile, Catherine walked toward the entry with a calmness that only heightened the contrast between her and Camilla. She had no idea about the confrontation unfolding steps away. She moved with quiet purpose, focused solely on fulfilling her task. But her composure, her gentle presence, and the sincerity in her demeanor only amplified the public's reaction. She did not need to assert power. Her authority emerged naturally from her character. This effortless grace made Camilla's frustration even sharper, as Catherine stood there embodying everything Camilla wanted the public to see in her, but could never quite project. The symbolism of that moment was impossible to ignore. On one side stood Camilla, rigid, tense, fighting for relevance. On the other stood Catherine, steady, compassionate, effortlessly commanding fidelity. Between them stood Anne, embodying the monarchy's conscience. The contrast was stark, and it reshaped the emotional landscape inside the palace instantly. Staff who had been conflicted about their loyalties felt clarity forming. Advisors who feared political backlash sensed which direction public sentiment was moving. Catherine's reception was not just applause, It was a recalibration of power in real time. And as the cheers continued to roll through the courtyard, the impact rippled inward, touching every corner of the estate. Decisions that once seemed straightforward became fraught with new implications. People in positions of influence began reassessing their alliances, knowing that public fidelity often dictates royal stability. The atmosphere around the entry tightened, not with the strain of confrontation now, but with the awareness that something irreversible had just happened. But the monarchy's fractures would not remain symbolic for long. Inside the residence, another clash was building behind closed doors. The palace was chaos wrapped in silence. Advisors rushed between rooms, senior officials whispered in corridors. Every decision felt dangerous because Anne's public stand had shattered the illusion of unity, and Camilla was demanding immediate retaliation. Meanwhile, Catherine, still unaware of the full storm, was becoming the unexpected center of a conflict that had been brewing for far longer than she realized. The moment Anne blocked Camilla at the entry, the palace machinery lurched into panic. Camilla retreated into a private room, fuming, demanding immediate action. She insisted the estate issue a formal clarification, a reprimand, something, anything that reminded the world she still held authority. Her voice, sharp with humiliation, pushed advisors into a frantic scramble. They tried to calm her, urging patience, suggesting internal discussions before any drastic move. But Camilla was not interested in caution. In her mind, Anne's defiance was not just insubordination, it was a declaration of war, one that required a swift and public response. Officials found themselves walking a delicate tightrope. On one side stood Camilla, furious and deeply wounded, insisting on consequences. On the other stood Anne, whose actions, though shocking, were earning quiet respect among staff who had grown uneasy with recent shifts in power. Advisors attempted to smooth the situation, urging the family to maintain composure until the state dinner concluded. But even their measured words struggled to hold back the rising tide of emotion. Their voices dropped to hushed tones as they exchanged looks that revealed what they dare not doubt aloud. The monarchy had reached a dangerous fracture point. Catherine's arrival only complicated matters. She had walked in unaware of the confrontation, ready to perform her duties with her usual grace. But inside, she could feel something strange in the air.
People stared at her differently, some with hope, others with fear, and a few with unmistakable resentment. Whispers followed her down hallways, and aides who normally offered straightforward guidance now hesitated before speaking. Slowly, she realized the truth. She was not just part of the evening, she had become the center of it. Her presence had amplified the confrontation in ways she had not intended, and the weight of that realization settled heavily on her shoulders. Charles drifted between rooms, struggling to steady the chaos. Public sentiment clearly leaned toward Catherine, and he could not ignore the impact of the crowd outside. But internally, he felt compelled to defend Camilla, whose pride had been wounded in the most public way possible. He wanted to restore peace, to mend the damage, to get through the evening without further disaster. Yet his indecision only deepened the rift. He knew any action he took would be interpreted as choosing sides, and choosing wrong could devastate the monarchy's fragile balance. Advisors cautioned him repeatedly. They warned that if Camilla responded aggressively, the palace would face a scandal far worse than a momentary breach of protocol. Public sympathy could tilt even further away from her, painting her as desperate and vindictive at a time when Catherine symbolized stability. They urged restraint, suggested postponing decisions, and begged both Charles and Camilla to avoid statements that could inflame the situation. But Camilla refused to back down. Every piece of advice felt like betrayal. Every attempt at mediation felt like a reminder that the crowd had chosen someone else. Meanwhile, Anne stood alone in a quiet corner, fully aware of the storm gathering around her. She was not shaken. She had known this moment would come the second she stepped in front of Camilla. She understood the consequences, understood the political fallout, understood the backlash she would face. But she also understood why she had done it. Her loyalty was to the monarchy's integrity, not to the ego of a single individual. And if standing up meant stepping into conflict, she was prepared to face it. Her calm was not defiance, it was conviction, the kind that only comes when someone acts out of principle rather than ambition. And as tensions reached a breaking point, one final confrontation would define the future balance of power. What happened next never reached the public until now. Behind a sealed door, 3 figures faced each other: Anne, Camilla, and Catherine. What unfolded was not just a clash of personalities, but a battle for the soul of the monarchy. Voices tightened, emotions spilled, and a single sentence spoken quietly by Catherine brought the room to a standstill. The moment the door closed, the atmosphere thickened, charged with the kind of tension that only long-standing wounds can produce. Camilla launched forward immediately, her fury unrestrained, her voice trembling with humiliation. She demanded an explanation, called Anne's public intervention reckless, disrespectful, dangerous. Her words hit the room like blows, sharp and uncontrolled, revealing the depth of her insecurity. Her anger was not just about the confrontation at the entry. It was about the unraveling of her authority, the sudden crack in the power she thought she held securely. And standing inches away, she made no attempt to hide her belief that Anne had sabotaged her intentionally. Anne did not flinch. She stood firm, her shoulders squared, her expression unwavering. She met Camilla's accusations with a calm that only intensified the sting. Anne did not apologize. She did not retreat. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had carried the burden of truth for too long, reminding Camilla that protocol existed for a reason, that leadership was not seized, it was earned. She refused to let the monarchy be reshaped by personal ambition. She refused to let tradition be bent to satisfy the insecurities of someone who mistook visibility for legitimacy. Her voice remained steady, even as Camilla's grew sharper. And that composure only fueled Camilla's frustration further.
Caught between them, Catherine felt the weight of both women's expectations pressing inward. She had stepped into the room hoping to ease tensions, not realizing how deeply the fractures had spread. She attempted to mediate, urging them to refocus on the responsibilities they all shared. But the moment she spoke, both women turned toward her with different emotions, Camilla with suspicion, Anne with relief. Catherine had not meant to claim moral authority, yet her presence alone shifted the balance. Her calmness contrasted sharply with Camilla's anger, and her sincerity softened the edge of Anne's firmness. Without trying, she embodied the very steadiness the monarchy desperately needed. Camilla saw it, the room saw it,
And for a brief moment, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the realization that she had become the center of a conflict she never asked to lead. She tried to downplay her influence, but the dynamic refused to shift back. Every word she spoke carried a gravity, as if the room itself acknowledged her as the stabilizing anchor in the chaos. And when the argument reached its boiling point, Catherine, quiet, composed, yet undeniably resolute, said a single sentence that froze the air. "We cannot lead by fighting for the crown. We lead by being worthy of it." The words were simple, but the impact was devastating. Camilla's fury faltered, Anne's breath caught. The weight of Catherine's statement sank into the walls, exposing the truth that had been building beneath every conflict. Leadership was not about position or protocol, it was about character. And in that instant, the unspoken acknowledgement settled heavily in the room. Catherine was the one the public trusted. Catherine was the one the monarchy gravitated toward. Catherine was the one whose presence inspired unity rather than division. She had not claimed power. She was simply recognized as the one who deserved it. Camilla felt the shift as acutely as a blow. Her silence was not acceptance, it was shock, a realization that her struggle for authority was failing in the most painful way possible, not through attack, but through comparison. Anne, meanwhile, understood the moment for what it was, a confirmation of everything she had fought to protect. Her eyes softened, not with pity, but with clarity. Catherine's influence was not a threat, it was the monarchy's lifeline. Yet even this explosive confrontation was not the final twist. The true shock came once the dinner began. The moment the royal procession finally began, guests knew something had changed. The order was different, the energy was different. Catherine was not just participating, she was leading. And as she stepped forward, the crowd again erupted, sealing a shift that could no longer be denied. Camilla watched, forced into a symbolic retreat, while Anne stood in quiet solidarity, knowing the monarchy had just entered a new era. That first step Catherine took carried the weight of everything that had happened in the hours before. It was not planned, requested, or imposed by any advisor. It was simply the natural result of the night's unraveling, the culmination of the public's devotion, Anne's defiance, and Camilla's crumbling authority. Catherine did not seek the lead position, yet everyone around her instinctively adjusted to her presence.
Making space, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, the procession reordered itself in real time, as if the monarchy itself were recalibrating around the one person who had emerged as its anchor. Catherine's role in the procession was not ostentatious or dramatic, it was subtle, quietly authoritative, undeniably dignified. But to those who understood royal protocol, the shift spoke volumes. She was not walking behind anyone. She was not waiting for permission. She moved forward with a calm steadiness that radiated confidence, not dominance. And because of that, her presence resonated even more powerfully than if she had seized the spotlight intentionally. Catherine was leading because the moment demanded it, and everyone present, guests, officials, aides, recognized it instinctively. Camilla's reaction, however, told an entirely different story. She hesitated, caught between fighting for the position she had spent years trying to solidify and surrendering to a shift she could no longer control. Ultimately, she stepped back, just one small step, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but symbolically that step echoed through the hall like a verdict. It was a retreat, not forced by any hand, but compelled by circumstance, emotion, and the undeniable power of public perception. Camilla watched Catherine take her place, feeling the weight of the moment close around her. It was not just a loss of position, it was the realization that influence had been pried from her grasp by nothing more than the public's unshakable loyalty to someone else. International guests noticed the change instantly. Diplomats exchanged knowing looks, understanding that they were witnessing more than a ceremonial adjustment. They saw the emergence of a new center of power, calm, steady, emotionally resonant. Catherine's influence now stretched beyond the palace, beyond the family, seeping into diplomatic and political expectations. In quiet whispers, foreign officials noted that approaching the monarchy now meant approaching Catherine first. Her presence was becoming synonymous with stability, something the world craved in a landscape defined by uncertainty. Anne, watching from a short distance, understood the gravity of what she had set in motion. She did not celebrate, she did not smirk, she simply observed with a solemn clarity that reflected both pride and responsibility. She had intervened not for personal satisfaction, but because Catherine's leadership carried a moral weight the monarchy desperately needed. As she watched Catherine move forward, Anne felt the unmistakable confirmation that her decision had been the right one. The new order was not one she forced, it was one that revealed itself when truth finally broke through the walls of tradition. The shift in that hall marked more than a moment. It marked the beginning of a political realignment inside the palace. Advisors would reevaluate their loyalties, strategies would be rewritten, expectations would be recalculated, and those who had underestimated Catherine would now have to navigate a monarchy shaped by her steadiness rather than Camilla's ambition. The consequences would not unfold overnight, but the trajectory was clear. Catherine was the figure the world responded to, the one who brought coherence where chaos threatened to reign. And as the first speeches began echoing through the hall, one truth was undeniable. Nothing in the monarchy would ever be the same again. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next